Talk to us about any of the segments tonight or the results in this big night of election races, which will be covered continuously for the rest of the night. Keep it locked on MSNBC. Hardball starts now.
Virginia is for lovers of those old Confederate statues. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews across the Potomac River from the Old Dominion. That's right. Virginia voted today, and early exit polls show that 3 out of 5 voters, that's 3 out of 5, want the Confederate statues, which have been at the heart of the governor's race, left standing. All eyes are on that marquee race for governor down there between Republican Ed Gillespie and Democrat Ralph Northam, the lieutenant governor. And right now, NBC News is characterizing that race for governor as too early to call with the polls closed. But Democrats are bracing themselves for either a comforting victory or, of course, another devastating defeat. Recent polling has shown Northam with a slight edge, but within the margin of error. Gillespie, a former aide to President George W. Bush, has tried to balance his establishment Republican bona fides while adopting Trumpian tactics to his own self. If he wins, he could provide fellow Republicans with a blueprint on how to campaign in the age of Trump. But let's get the very latest on the race right now from our own Steve Kornacki. Steve, what do we know?
Well, it was 7 o'clock, so the polls just closed in Virginia. We're still an hour away in New Jersey. As you just showed, we have no actual votes in yet. We'll keep you posted. But what can we show you from the exit polls? Let's take a look at a few of the key questions that we can start to tackle there. First of all, let's see if we can, let me call up, there it is. Okay. That should call it up. Here we go. The Trump factor started in Virginia. The president, his approval rating, according to the exit poll, clocks in at 43%. By comparison, last time they had a governor's race in Virginia, 4 years ago, Barack Obama was the president. His party's candidate did win. Very close race. His number was 46 on Election Day. Trump's today coming in at 43 in this exit poll. Also, New Jersey, you could see a blue state. Not surprisingly, 32% is the Trump approval rating there. But keep your eye on this. Even more significant maybe in this New Jersey race. How about Chris Christie? Look at the odyssey for Chris Christie throughout his time as governor. He peaked at 77% back during Hurricane Sandy. All the way down today in the exit poll, a 19% approval rating for Chris Christie as his lieutenant governor tries to succeed him there. But back to Virginia, obviously the marquee race. Something else we can tell you. The story last year in the election of Donald Trump was that social class split among white college, white non-college voters. What share of the electorate are we talking about here? In this exit poll, at least the data we have right now, 43% of the voters in Virginia, white college grads, 26% white non-college. You could see that would be, if that holds, we'll see as the more numbers come in, if that holds, that would be an uptick in white college graduates from 2016. That's something Democrats wanted to see. And you mentioned it too. This question here, Ed Gillespie, he ran on these Trump cultural issues. The question here, Confederate monuments on government property, should they be removed? Only 36% of Virginians in the exit poll said yes, left in place. 60% said leave them be. So that one's going to get certainly plenty of attention. That was an issue that Ed Gillespie ran on, Chris.
Well, thank you very much, Steve Kornacki. We'll be back to you throughout the evening. Anyway, the governor's race isn't the only interesting one to watch in Virginia. All 100 seats in Virginia's House of Delegates are up for grabs today, and Democrats are hoping to gain ground there. As NBC News reports, quote, if Democrats surprise and gain 10 or more seats in the House of Delegates, it would be a sign they are probably on track to take back the U.S. House of Representatives next year. For more on this and the governor's race, I'm joined by Jeff Shapiro, politics columnist for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Jeff, thank you so much for joining. What do you smell out there tonight in terms of how this race is going to speak to the country?
You know, the fundamentals in Virginia have always favored the Democrats. To the outside world, this may seem a southern state, but it is a suburban-dominated state in which the majority of people who live here are from somewhere else, whether it's out of state or overseas. This has had a moderating effect on the state's politics, and that's particularly evident in higher turnout elections. This is why Trump didn't win Virginia in 2016, and it looks like, it looks like Ralph Northam will win it for governor.
Well, let me ask you about Trump here. How's he do? Is it that thing where you just get more rural the more Trump, like the days of Oliver North, where you could always tell where the Oliver North signs were going to be on people's lawns the further you got from D.C.? It was pretty simple. Is that the same with Trump?
2/3 of the people who live in Virginia live in cities and suburbs. It's in those cities and suburbs that the enmity for the president is greatest. And maybe it's just an accident of geography that Virginia's across the river from you all in Washington, but there's not much that Donald Trump has said or done that hasn't had an immediate and measured effect on suburban Virginia, whether it was the perceived Muslim ban, the freeze on federal employment, and the threatened shutdown of the federal government, the president's gambit to squeeze money from the Democrats for the wall on the border with Mexico.
Let's talk about the House of Delegates, the lower house out there in Virginia, down there in Virginia. Do you think that's going to give us a reading on how the chances are for the Democrats to pick up the U.S. House next November?
It's tricky, Mr. Matthews. The legislature in Virginia, when controlled by the Democrats and now controlled by the Republicans, has elevated to a high art hyper-partisan gerrymandering. That goes a long way towards protecting a number of these Republican incumbents. That said, there's still 54 of 66 Republican seats contested, and in Northern Virginia, where the turnouts are running higher, it's possible, underscore that, possible, that there could be a wave effect, and some of these Republican incumbents in these fast-growing, increasingly diverse outer suburbs of D.C. could be in trouble.
Yeah. Let's get one thing straight, Jeff. You're the sophisticated gentleman with the bow tie. I'm not Mr. Matthews, I'm Chris Matthews, but thank you for your dignity tonight. I've always been impressed by your elan, your sophistication, and your nuance. Sir, thank you so much. Jeff Shapiro of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. You haven't heard that stuff lately. In the closing days of this race, the polls have tightened. A Real Clear Politics average has Northam up by 3. That's the one. I think that's the number to keep your eye on, about 3 within the margin of error. Just a month ago, Northam had a 6-point lead. I think it's closed a little, but not enough, I don't think, for Gillespie. Anyway, Hillary Clinton beat Trump in Virginia by 5 points last time around. Last year, it was the only southern state that Donald Trump didn't win. For more on how Democrats are feeling about this race and their party, I'm joined by Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez. Tom Perez, do you know that you have the power to get rid of a presidential nominee when you feel like it? I just heard this from John in Brazil the other day. Do you have that kind of power?
I didn't realize that. I better not.
I love Donna, but I didn't know she was that powerful.
Well, I better not catch the cold next week, or someone might do that to me.
Well, let me ask you about this this whole race tonight, because Virginia is not the old Confederacy. It's not the old Dominion anymore. It's got a lot of Northerners living down there, a lot of single women that work in D.C. who are almost all pro-choice, and they're sensitive about it. You have African Americans who are voting in big numbers now. Is that still a state that you guys own?
Well, Virginia is a purple state. There's no doubt about it. That's why this election will be close.
Even with a Democratic governor and 2 Democratic senators?
Hey, but Virginia is and 66 Republicans in the House of Delegates, and we're changing that because that was a hyper gerrymander. And one thing that Mr. Shapiro, I'm going to call you Mr. Matthews.
No, don't do that. Just call me Chris. Please. Don't do that here.
One thing that is so important about this is I think those down ballot races, I spoke to. So
you buy this is a leading indicator of what your party can do next November. If you pick up 10 seats or so in the assembly there in the House of Delegates, that's a good sign.
I think it's a very good sign, and we'll see what happens tonight. But I met with most, if not all, of the challengers, and you know, in the last 3 or 4 cycles, Chris, Democrats only contested 45 or so seats, and so we seated the other 50, 55. We have 88 candidates this time, and they are spectacular candidates, and they're going to drive turnout in their districts. We're obviously not going to win 88 seats, but when you get people
How about the districts in Virginia where Hillary Clinton won last year, and you have a Republican incumbent? They must be your happy hunting ground.
Well,
that's where you'd like to win.
And there are 17 of them, and we need 17 seats to flip the House of Delegates.
Now,
that's a tall order to get to 17.
Will you get 17?
I think that's a tall order tonight, but I think that you know, the last time that Democrats won both New Jersey and Virginia governor's races was 2005, and we know what happened in 2006. And the reason we're winning is because I spent a lot of time in both states. People are talking about health care. They see what Donald Trump is doing. They have loved ones who have an opioid addiction issue, and they're seeing this president take away their access. In Virginia, they haven't expanded Medicare. Why? Because the Republican-dominated House and Senate have said no. And people understand that. And Virginia looks a lot like America, the diversity
Well, you're
of
right,
America.
because we've got exit polling saying that health care is the #1 issue in Virginia. So you've nailed that one.
Well, I've
Here's
met
my
a
problem with your
healthcare
party, by the way. And you know I have a problem, which is you argue about the Republican tax bill, which I think shouldn't get near passed, but you don't offer an alternative to rebuild this country. Why do Democrats fear to talk about construction, jobs, good jobs, railways, fixing up the country, and building a big intercontinental railroad system, doing something that catches up to the rest of the world? Why don't Democrats support public enterprise?
Oh, I do that all the time. I mean, the Democratic Party is about bold possibilities. It's about making sure that we give opportunities in every community for everyone.
You got to stop dithering about what the Republicans are doing and outmatch them.
Amen.
Thank you.
Chris. It's always good
Tom
to be
Perez,
with you.
the chair of the Democratic Party, who does not claim the right to remove the nominee for president. Anyway, President Trump has cast a long shadow over the race, despite having just a 41% approval rating in Virginia. Not so hot, but I think it went up today to 43 in the exits. Anyway, from Virginia, not so hot, but I think it went up today to 43 in the exits. Anyway, from Seoul, South Korea, the president urged his supporters to get out and vote for Gillespie. From South Korea, he did it, tweeting, Ralph Northam will allow crime to be rampant in Virginia. He's weak on crime, weak on our great vets, anti-Second Amendment, and has been horrible on the Virginia economy. Vote Ed Gillespie today. That's from Seoul, South Korea, courtesy of the president. Gillespie has kept President Trump at arm's length, however, even if the president hasn't kept Gillespie at arm's length. On the issues, will it be enough to win the governor's seat? For more, I'm joined by Michael Steele, former RNC chair and an MSNBC political analyst. If Donald Trump's such a great president, why won't Ed Gillespie mention him? Michael, you chuckle, but it is a problem. If you like the guy so much and think he ought to get reelected, renominated, whatever, because that seems to be the impulse among 80% of Republicans, why not show up with him?
That's not necessarily reflected among, candidates who are running around the country who are going to be running in various races. They're going to be reflecting the people in their community. You got to be sensitive to where, popular national figure or unpopular national figures stand in your state as well. And so the focus is, I went through this in 2006, wearing the brand of a party that was not very popular with the American people and certainly not within my own state. But you still forge ahead and you make your case to those folks about the issues that they care about, which I think Ed Gillespie did masterfully.
You're not on the sidelines in this race, Michael. Don't talk like you're on the sidelines, because you're in there fishing in troubled waters. I know what you're up to. You're trying to get African-American Democrats not to vote Democrat because of this assumed cutting from the ballot of the lieutenant governor.
You're not going to sit here and get away with that. That's not what I'm doing at all. I've not done that at all. And anyone who says that, including political, are dead wrong. The fact of the matter is that myself and J.C. Watts, who was on this program last night, made it very clear last night that the concerns that we raised was the way the Democratic Party and this Democratic candidate treated the African-American candidate for lieutenant governor, and the type of literature they put out that was two-faced, where he was on the literature when it went to certain neighborhoods in the northern parts of Virginia, and he was off the literature in other parts of Virginia. So,
I thought that was because he wasn't in good straits with the laborers union, International Labor Union.
Oh, Chris, please, spare me. Come on, stop it. Because not good straits with the unions, really.
Okay, keep schooling me here if you want, Michael,
me
but
that it's okay.
You tell me,
Chris.
You say you weren't involved in this issue, and you're here arguing the issue.
No, I'm just saying the fact that you just want to sidestep it, because you know daggone well that if a Republican put out two pamphlets, one showing a black candidate and the other one taking that black candidate off his pamphlet, that you would be screaming to high heaven. Okay. So you're not going to get away with it. You're not going to play this game. And I think it's important that black Republicans push back on it.
I share such suspicions as those you just voiced. I just wanted to know whether you're in this fight or you're watching it. Which is it?
Oh, I'm in the fight for Ed.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, there's no doubt about that.
That's what I wanted to know. And you're making your points. Thank you. Michael Steele, as always. Well done with some charm. We'll be tracking, by the way, the returns from Virginia all night long tonight. Again, NBC News is characterizing the governor's race Polls have closed, but it's too early to call. We'll be right back with the bombshell news on the Russian investigation. There's always some Russian news. Trump campaign foreign advisor Carter Page says he coordinated with top campaign officials, 5 of them, before and after his trip to Moscow last July, after maintaining he made the trip as a private citizen. And he met with top Russian officials while he was there. The glue gets thicker and stronger between the Russians and the Trumpies. This is Trump's longtime bodyguard is interviewed by the House Intelligence Committee. Trump doesn't like that guy being interviewed, I can tell you. And this is Hardball with the Action News. We're getting word right now that President Trump attempted a trip to the demilitarized zone, the 30th parallel between North and South Korea. But he was turned back by not problems of military problems, but bad weather. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell joins us now from Seoul with the story. Kelly, it looks like sunshine over there right now.
Well, there is heavy fog here, Chris, and this is a breaking development because in advance of this trip, the White House had said President Trump would not go to the demilitarized zone. Vice President Mike Pence had visited when he did an Asian tour earlier in the administration. So this was an important and surprise development that has now fallen apart. The pool traveling with the president had this information, and it was held for a period of time as they made an attempt with Marine One to get to the demilitarized zone. They were turned back due to fog, restaged, tried to go again, and then determined what we call a weather call that they would not be able to make this trip. It would have been important, especially because the layout at the roughly 150-mile strip between North Korea and South Korea is a place where, according to those other lawmakers who have visited and people like Mike Pence, you can look right into the eyes of North Korean soldiers who are staged on the other side. There was an enormous uptick of security around President Trump for this attempt that did not succeed due to weather. Obviously, the president had tried to make this a surprise, in part because of the security threats that would be inherent for this kind of a visit. And leading up to this attempt, President Trump had notably turned the volume down on his own rhetoric, not repeating some of his more belligerent, provocative language that we have seen from him back in the United States, much more toned down while here in Seoul. Of course, Seoul itself is only roughly 35 miles from the North Korean border. So this was an attempt to make a surprise visit, which would have been an opportunity for the president to look right into North Korea, a show of strength, perhaps, certainly an opportunity for him to get some perspective. But apparently weather has foiled that attempt for President Trump to be right on the border with North Korea. Chris?
Great reporting from Kelly O'Donnell in Seoul, South Korea. The latest in the Russian investigation and much more as we're trying to, or actually starting to see very early results in the Virginia governor's race. Right now, the governor's race, we're calling it too early to call. Back after this. Welcome back to Hard. We continue to watch that Virginia governor's race right now, but there's new information tonight on the Russian investigation. The newly released transcript of Carter Page's testimony before the House Intelligence Committee last week reveals more about the former Trump campaign advisor's trip to Moscow in July of 2016, right in the middle of the campaign. Page said under oath that prior to making the trip, he informed five campaign officials of his travel plans, including Jeff Sessions, the future AG, and Hope Hicks, the future White House communications director, and both served the administration, as well as then campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. While Page said he traveled as a private citizen to give a speech at the university in Moscow, an email shows he offered to coordinate the details of his speech with the campaign. The transcript also reveals that after his event in Moscow, Page reported to campaign officials in an email that I'll send you guys a readout soon regarding some incredible insights and outreach I received from a few Russian legislators and senior members of the presidential administration here. Close quote. While Page told the committee he did not recall what he said about adding new language to the RNC platform on Ukraine before the convention, an email shows Page congratulating his colleagues in the campaign after the change was made. Quote, as for the Ukraine amendment, excellent work. I'm joined right now by Ken Delaney, an investigative reporter with NBC News. Shannon Pettypiece is White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. And Robert Costa is national political reporter with the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. Ken, it's great to have you on. Can you just give me a full picture now? Take some time. What do we know about Carter Page's relationship with the Trump campaign? For months, if not a year now, he said, oh, I was a private citizen on a tourist visa or whatever, acting like he had nothing to do with Trump and his plan to become president and deal with Russia his way.
That's right, Chris. So I think his testimony moves the story forward in two important dimensions. One, we've confirmed once and for all that he did meet with senior Russian government and business officials. After he suggested for months, as you said, that he did not, he met with the deputy prime minister who passed on his good wishes to Trump. He met with a number 2 person at a major oil and gas company. This was a high-level trip. And while Carter Page may say he was taking it in his personal capacity, it seems fairly obvious that the reason these important Russians were meeting with Carter Page was because he was Trump's foreign policy advisor. The second thing this testimony shows is that he coordinated this trip with the campaign. He sought permission from these senior campaign officials. And one of them, J.D. Gordon, told NBC News today that he tried to block the trip because he didn't think it was a good idea for Carter Page to go, and Page went around him to other officials who green-lighted it. And then lastly, we know that he reported back about the success of the trip and the coordination and the conversations he had with these Russian officials. He told the campaign about it. So if we believe, and it seems fairly clear, that Carter Page was somebody that Russians were trying to use to infiltrate the Trump campaign, Russians were trying to seduce, recruit, whatever verb you want to use, it's very clear that senior officials in the Trump campaign were on notice that this was going on. They either didn't understand it or disregarded it, Chris.
Thank you so much, Ken. Let me go to Shannon right now about the implications. It seems to me, if you're talking of the question, I don't think it's a question anymore, the idea of collusion between the Russians and the Trump people, when they changed the platform, the plank dealing with Ukraine, to a pro-Russian position, and then they go back, good work, excellent work, back and forth. It sounds to me like they're doing the work of a collusion.
That is certainly how some people are interpreting all this.
I don't know how you don't interpret it that way. You're doing stuff that they want done, and you're giving credit to those who got it done for you.
And the story keeps changing, and we keep peeling back layers of this story, like the meeting about adoption that turned out to be a meeting about sanction, like Carter Page, who was just supposed to be a list on a name, and then a name on a list of foreign policy advisors. Then everyone forgot about him. And then we come out all these contacts, like George Papadopoulos. Who's that? I couldn't remember who that was. Yeah. And then again, all of these campaign contacts. And like, I think we'll probably find additional information out about this campaign platform.
Well, Robert, this whole problem is this unpeeling of an onion, basically. We just keep unpeeling it and peeling it. Trump's position from the beginning has been there was no Russian attempt to intervene in our election. That's fallen away a long time ago. Then there was no connection between us and them. And you can see this flirtation back and forth involving Sessions and Carter Page and all these guys. How does Trump look in a straight face to somebody like you who covers him and stick to that original position? There was no relationship.
Hard to say. And we've been waiting for so long because watching the special counsel, it's hard to speculate about what Bob Mueller is up to. But we're seeing a lot of action this week on Capitol Hill. You're seeing the congressional committees publishing the transcript with Carter Page. Yeah. But what this really tells, if you look at that list you put up on the screen of the 5 people he was talking to inside of the campaign, the most important person, Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Now the Attorney General
says there was no relationship.
But he's coming to Capitol Hill next week to testify before the Judiciary Committee. Democrats are going to have tough questions for the Attorney General about the whole scope of that relationship with Carter Page.
Well, Shannon, it seems to me that is beautifully set up by Robert. One of those moments where, like, Bill Clinton goes in for his, his grand jury testimony. When you know what the situation is, you know there's a conflict between what he said before and what he has to answer for, and it gets into this language of what do you mean by is, and those things. Do you remember any relationship? Well, not that was reached a conclusion. But the way he was saying it before Sessions was, we never met, we never did anything. It turns out we met. And then it says, well, there was no discussions about collusion. Well, they did discuss collusion.
I think
and they did discuss what the Russians wanted.
A debate over what's a meeting, which almost came up with Carter Page. Well, I mean, we met in passing. I don't necessarily call that a meeting. What's a meeting? Where, we're getting down
But we now know that he's admitted that he was in a meeting where he had to shut off Papadopoulos and tell him to close down his argument for a deal, for another meeting. We know it all went on. How close are we getting to an argument here that there was collusion, Robert?
There was this outer rim of the campaign. It's arguable, but different.
Trump had nothing to do with this.
Well, I'm not ready to say that at all. I think you look at Sam Clovis and George Papadopoulos, all these people who are kind of inside of the campaign but not talking to Trump daily. They were still the campaign. Yeah. And they were having all of these meetings. And what Bob Mueller and the investigators at Capitol Hill are trying to piece together, where's the real network here? Where's the connection? Who knew what?
History lesson.
Right. And
Haldeman, Ehrlichman, Mitchell, all those guys went down before Nixon went down.
Well, don't forget we still have Manafort and Flynn out there, and there's a lot of speculation about a Flynn indictment coming, and I think more is to come on Manafort.
Okay, what do you know about the Flynn indictment coming? Are they going to squeeze the man, the father, to protect the son? What are they going to try to get out of this guy? It was done in the Rosenberg case. You threaten one part of the family and said, we're going to go after the part you love, and you can save that part. You can't save yourself, so make the deal.
Well, we've seen Mueller moving in a very smart, methodical way, so that is certainly the type of thing you would see a seasoned prosecutor like this do.
He's frightening. Anyway, thank you, Ken Delaney and Sir. Thank you, Shannon Pettypiece and Robert Costa. We're still tracking, of course, we're going to do throughout the night the results coming in from Virginia in that hot governor's race. Again, NBC News. This gets kind of dull, doesn't it? Characterizing the governor's race as too early to call. It's only 7:30. Of course it's too early. This is Hardball, where the action is. Welcome back to Hardball. Polls in Virginia right now have closed for over an hour, half hour now, and we're watching the returns coming in that governor's race, which is, we're saying, too early to call right now. Well, both we could have known that because this is going to be a close race. Both Ralph Northam and Ed Gillespie face a set of demographic challenges in tonight's race in Virginia, where political divisions are reflected along geographic lines. No surprise there. To win, Northam needs to run up the score in Northern Virginia, which is a lot like the rest of the country. It's not very southern, which is a large population and are people from all over the country, and a Democratic stronghold, largely, I say, because of so many single women. In turn, for Gillespie to win, he needs to offset that margin in the rural parts of the Commonwealth where people have southern accents and places like Western Virginia. For more, let's check back with the expert, Steve Kornacki. Steve, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it seems like that's the way we look at it.
Look, Northern Virginia is the place to look, and that's where I want to kind of dig a little deeper here. We're starting to get some numbers. Now, keep in mind, look, Gillespie's leading statewide right now. We do know that it tends to be Northern Virginia that comes in. The bulk of it comes in late, so keep that in mind. But let's focus on those counties right outside of Washington, D.C., you know, basically talking about, sorry, I should get this pen selected, basically talking about, well, it shouldn't, God, all right. Anyway, 25% or so of the vote is going to come from those counties right outside of Washington, D.C. Now, here's the thing to be looking at. When we showed you those exit polls earlier, we showed almost half the college-educated white vote was going to Northam. That's a very high number for a Democrat to be getting, and that immediately sets alarm bells off saying, boy, are the Democrats doing even better than expected in these Northern Virginia suburbs. Let me give you something where we're starting to get, if I can get this thing to work. It seems to have frozen. I'm going to give you the numbers. Prince William County. We're starting to get some numbers. That's right here on the map. Northern Virginia. Now, keep this in mind. Ed Gillespie ran for the Senate 3 years ago in Virginia. In this county, Prince William, he lost by only 3 points. His goal was to be competitive there tonight. Not necessarily win, be competitive. But last year, this county swung hard against Trump. Trump lost it by 21. We don't have all the votes in there right now, but right now you have Gillespie trailing by 29 points in the votes that have been counted so far. So the question here for Gillespie was, could he bring it back to more of a 2014 level in Northern Virginia, or was he going to be stuck with the Trump stigma? Early indications may be pointing in that direction.
So he's getting what? Gillespie's getting the Trump vote?
No, Gillespie is getting the stigma in Northern Virginia because he ran as that sort of Bush-style Republican in 2014. He couldn't win Northern Virginia, but he could keep the losses in check.
Getting the Trump vote is not a good thing in Virginia. Anyway, Thank you so much, Steve Kornacki. I'm joined right now by Steve Jardine, who's the Democratic strategist from down there, author of Foxes in the Hen House, How the Republicans Stole the South and the Heartland, and what the Democrats must do to run them out. And Cornell Belcher, of course, also a Democratic strategist and MSNBC political lens. Gentlemen, let me get your two schools of thought on this. I was amazed over the last couple of weeks, Steve, that Gillespie, who's all wrong for Virginia, he's from Catholic U up in Washington. He grew up in New Jersey. He's an establishment. He's a lifelong lobbyist. He's part of the Republican leadership in the RNC. There's nothing Southern about him, really. And he's up against this guy, Northam, who, whatever you say about him, has a nice Southern accent and seems homegrown. And yet, these numbers keep coming at us as close. What do you make, Steve? Make of it.
Well, I think part of what you're seeing, Chris, is the Trump folks are fired up. They're going to turn out all the time. I don't see them going anywhere. They're going to keep turning out, and they're going to turn out for a Republican. So Gillespie has that. What you've seen Gillespie try to do in Virginia is try to moderate himself in many ways, not in all ways. Obviously, the moving of the monuments and things like that play into that base. But I think he's trying to have his cake and eat it too a little bit, where I'm going to keep that Trump base, but I'm going to try to eat into Northern Virginia and hopefully keep the lieutenant governor down, win big enough in Southwest and Southside Virginia, where Republicans traditionally have done well. But you saw Mark Warner in 01. You saw Jim Webb do well in Southside and Southwest. So Democrats have evened the score there a little bit. But I think Gillespie's strategy is make myself look safe to enough voters and then rely on the base to come in without having to do too much to keep them. And he's made it a close race.
Well, let me ask you a first question. I'll ask the same question. Steve, first to you. Was Northam, the Democratic nominee, who's also lieutenant governor, was he wise to say, tear down all the Confederate statues right up front? That was the first thing he did. Was he smart to do that politically?
Well, I guess we'll find out shortly, right, Chris? I mean, I think the polls in Virginia, at least ones I've seen, most Virginians say don't tear them down.
Well, we got exit polls tonight.
Something like
we have an exit poll that just came in. It's probably based on early voting today, but it does say 60% of the states say leave them alone, leave them standing. Cornell, what's your thinking about this politically? Was it a smart move to challenge the old order that much?
Well, my thinking is, look, if that's what you believe, take the stand and fight for it. I think Democrats have suffered far too long by being mealy-mouthed and trying to take.
Yeah, but is it worth losing an election? Is it something to die for?
He's not, Chris. He's not going to lose. He is not going to lose an election in Virginia fighting for, saying that take down the Confederate flag. This is a state, by the way, Chris, that Obama won back-to-back majorities in. Hillary Clinton, who was not the best candidate in the world, also carried 4 or 5 points. And we have 2 Democratic sitting senators and Terry McAuliffe as governor. I don't think Democrats should play defensive in a state like Virginia. If he believes we should take down the Confederate monuments, well, then he should fight for it and make his case. Don't try to have it both ways.
Where are you on that?
Well, but I think that's the
I want to ask Cornell, because I want to ask everybody. I'm going to ask you the same question, Steve. We have battlefields in Virginia, lots of them, and you've got the bull runs, you got all kinds of stuff out in Virginia. So much of the war was fought in Virginia. Should you take the Confederate monuments off of the battlefield, Cornell? Just leave the northern flags.
Truth of the matter is, even among African-American voters, and we did polling with minority voters in Virginia, they don't see this as the top of the issue concern for them, right? They're much more concerned.
I'm nailing you here, Cornell. I want an answer. Where do you stand
with me?
On taking them off the battlefield?
Absolutely. Let me be perfectly clear. I think they were traitors to the United States of America, and that should come down. Period.
I think you're not running for office. Well, when you run for office, let me know, because that's got a lot of nerve behind it. And Steve, where are you in this? Keep the statues up or take them down?
Well, listen, I respect the side that says that's part of our history. I get it. We got a lot of history in museums. I think you can put them in museums. I think you can honor our history and still not disparage what the South tried to do. The South tried to split the Union. I think the bigger issue, though, honestly, Chris, is that Democrats very often let these single polarizing issues define them. This race is not about that. Republicans are voting against health care. They're voting against food stamps. They're voting against programs for education for the kids. Look at what Trump's doing on education. The Republicans in Congress have done nothing, to put money in the pockets of working Americans.
Everybody's
That's what
been
Democrats
honest here.
ought to be talking about.
I want to talk about, I think, about the statues. I think Hollywood is guilty. Hollywood, starting in the 30s, started building up the old South that never existed. It was all this, what's her name, Scarlett O'Hara, and all that nonsense about the wonders and joys of the Old South. They never showed the slaves being beaten, put in chains. You never saw a slave in chains. All those movies were romanticized crap to make the old white tyranny look good. Anyway, it was awful, and we were brought up with that propaganda. Anyway, thank you. I don't know why we were. Thank you, Steve Jarding and Cornell Belcher. I'm closer to you than you think, Cornell. Up next, the Hardball Roundtable on the 2 big contests of the evening, including that race for, I don't think it's much of a race for Jersey governor, because I think Christie really stunk up that state. Polls close at the top of the hour on that one. You're watching Hardball. Welcome back to Hard. We continue to watch the governor's race down in Virginia across the river from here, which NBC News has characterized, as I said, too early to call. The polls just closed at 7 Eastern. Anyway, meanwhile, the other big race for governor tonight, not exactly a squeaker, we don't think, is in New Jersey, where polls will close at 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm joined right now by the roundtable tonight, Annie Linsky, chief national correspondent for the Boston Globe. You love it when I say your name. And Vivian Salam is a reporter for NBC News, our own, and David Catney is a senior politics writer with U.S. News and World Report. David, you were making a point before that this Republican candidate for governor in Virginia, we're all watching as the marquee election, is not exactly got the same cut of the jib as Donald J. Trump.
No, he's a establishment Republican. He's a former Republican National Committee chairman. He's a lobbyist. I mean, this was a party guy. Now he tried.
He's also a northerner.
He's in New Jersey.
Yeah.
But he also, he tried to use the Trump playbook late in the game, using cultural issues, right?
Name them.
Confederate statues, saying they should be kept up. Talking about gangs. MS-13 gangs.
Saying that the Democratic candidate was against outlawing sanctuary cities. He was like voting negatively to make a point.
Right. So, and also allowing felons out. Out of prison.
We're looking, by the way, at the early, it is not a call, but we're looking at the raw vote. And this, to the experts of Virginia that have educated me all day, is not a surprise to Gillespie, where they get the vote in from the rural areas faster. Ironically, they get an earlier vote.
Good numbers, I think, for Northam, because usually Southern Virginia pours in first, and the Republican always has a lead, right? A 3-4 point lead, and then we see...
He's a winner for an hour or two.
He's a winner for an hour or two, and then Northern Virginia, with all the voters...
We always do the raw vote. Since I watched the Nixon Kennedy race in 60. Don't pay attention to the raw vote, but we have to give you the news.
Absolutely.
Vivian.
So what we see in Virginia, traditionally the year after a presidential election, is they will often go for the party that is not in the White House. And so, with the exception of McAuliffe's second term, where...
You're like buyer's remorse.
It's just, whatever you want to call it, that has been the pattern so far. And so, whether or not we're going to see that again, we don't know. But, President Obama had really kind of dominated and pushed that state into the blue area for a while. And then, obviously, now... President Trump is trying to sway it back. Whether or not he's successful or not, it depends. Whether or not that's an indication of how he's been doing, it's too early to tell.
And in some states like Massachusetts, that when you vote for governor, you don't vote ideologically.
Right.
A lot of times, like in Utah, for years, they'd elect a Democratic governor just to balance things off with the Republican senators. Massachusetts regularly, or almost every other time, picks a Republican, even though it's a liberal state.
Yeah.
Virginia's like that. They can pick Republican governors. They didn't.
Yeah.
Bob McDonough.
No, I mean, but I do think, you've got to say here, Northam is not exactly the most dynamic candidate. I mean, certainly the fundamentals are looking good tonight for him, but I mean, my goodness, it felt a little bit to me like...
And Tim Kaine's not very dynamic, but he's very popular. Anyway, let's go to New Jersey, where polls closed at the top of the hour. Reporters captured Governor Christie engaging in an argument. I love Christie fighting with a voter outside his polling location. Let's watch a portion of that action.
It's easier to sit here and complain. It's easier to sit. The money like you. Yeah, oh, really? I'm sure. Easier to sit here and complain. But you know what? That's the joy of public service. It's serving folks. It's serving folks. Yeah, it's serving folks like you that is really such a unique joy. It really is.
David Cannes, why does he like to fight with anybody who wants to fight?
This is a final
This
bout.
is Sinatra quality.
This is a final
I
bout.
want to fight, I'll fight with you,
And this is a guy with a, 15% approval rating in Virginia. The guy never gave, it's probably 13%.
She wasn't part of that. Woman wasn't part of the 15.
Well, but she was the lieutenant, he gave his lieutenant governor virtually no chance in this race.
Why'd she run? Does anybody know why
she was lieutenant governor? She was next in line to run. They didn't have anyone else.
Get her head bashed in by a gale force headwinds here. Right?
A superstorm, you might say.
Oh,
right?
That's good.
We've been there.
It's going to be tough for her tonight. I think that's an easy win for the Democrats.
Right now, I'm looking at something that's fascinating me. I've been saying that for Democrats to win the Congress back, to win the House of Representatives, they probably won't get the Senate. They need double digits in the national polls because the way the gerrymandering and also issues where Democratic votes tend to be crowded in the big cities. They got it. They're up to double digits right now. They got the highest spread in recorded history practically right now.
Yeah, no.
They can win the House back if things continue the way they're going.
Well, I mean, but Democrats manage to mess these moments up, time and time again. I mean, they still need a message, and they still need to be able.
That's
I mean,
what
look at the
Tom
Georgia.
Perez about. He said, "Yeah, we got one." I said, "Yeah, that's what."
And what is
Why
it?
don't I know it?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so they have this problem again and again. So I think they have got that party has a lot of work to do if they really want to. And their fundraising is a mess. I mean, look at Donna Brazile.
They think it's a seesaw, and if Trump goes down, they go up. They think it's automatic. That's why they're playing it so careful.
The other question is whether the Democrats can rally behind a leader. Right now, the party is in some disarray. They can't. Right, well, exactly. Is there someone that can really kind of rally the troops and say, let's do this together, have a unified message to get the party together again after what happened last year? That's the big question going forward.
Well, we're not even there. This
not even close. Not even close.
There's so many of those freshmen and sophomore, but there's no obvious presidential candidate except Joe Biden. I mean,
I would not overread the results of tonight to say it's going to mean anything about 2018. Remember, in 2013, Terry McAuliffe
won. You're telling people not to stay up toniay and watch me at midnight.
No, I'm saying stay up and watch all night.
There's a seat there. It goes down into a dangerous hole in the ground.
Wow.
Just teasing.
All right.
I'm just teasing.
No, but I mean, look, Terry McAuliffe won the governorship in 2013, and then Republicans in 2014 routed. They had
I
a
think
great
there's going to be headlines in all the
papers
papers tomorrow, based in all the papers across the country. Top of the fold on the East Coast of what happens tonight in Virginia. I do think it counts. I think the delegate races count a lot. If Hillary is able to win in the delegate races, where she run for president, look out. They're going to talk that up big. Annie Linsky, she'll be talking it up in the Globe. Vivian Salama, thank you. My colleague, and David Katniss, who's a pessimist about news value. And the polls in New Jersey will be closed at the top of the hour. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll get the first look at who will succeed Chris Christie. That state cannot wait to succeed Chris Christie, the Garden State. That's coming up at 8 o'clock Eastern. And the vote keeps pouring in Virginia. With more than 30% in now, NBC says this race still too early to call. This is Hardball. Next is. Let's get one more look at the Virginia governor's race. Right now, it's being counted. Steve Kornacki joins us.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, we could tell you Democrats are looking at what they're seeing right now. They are feeling very good. Let me give you a microcosm of what it is. We talked about Northern Virginia. Look, Democrats always do well here in Northern Virginia. Trump got absolutely buried. The challenge for Gillespie coming in tonight was just don't get buried like Trump did. Well, here's a perfect example of what we're seeing in Northern Virginia. Look at this. Loudoun County here. What you see, Northam, the Democrat, winning by 20. What was the margin in this county last year? It was Hillary Clinton by 17 over Donald Trump. This is worse than Trump. And by the way, when Ed Gillespie ran in this same county for the U.S. Senate 3 years ago, he won it. He won it by a few hundred votes. And tonight, he's losing it by 20. He's losing it worse than Trump. We are seeing this throughout Northern Virginia and the returns we're seeing right now. The Gillespie goal was don't get buried like Trump. He may get buried worse than Trump.
Whoa. Looks like Northam. Anyway, thank you, Steve Kornacki. 1968 was a tumultuous year in American politics. In his new book, Playing with Fire, the 1968 election and the transformation of American politics, my colleague Lawrence O'Donnell writes that the 1960s were a decade like no other, a high-speed kaleidoscope of the civil rights movement, assassinations, Bob Dylan, the Vietnam War, hippies, and America's first real anti-war movement. I'm joined right now by himself, Lawrence O'Donnell, host of The Last Word here on MSNBC. It's an honor to have you on, Lawrence. So, you know, when I think Bill Clinton once said, if you like the 60s, you're probably a Democrat. If you hated the 60s, you're probably a Republican. Reflect on that, because this is a big picture book.
Well, sure, because the 60s was probably the single most high-speed culture change, societal change, political change of the 20th century, and by far it was. I mean, for example, Chris, as you know, no guy's hair looked the same. No one at any age between 1960 and 1970. People thought differently. People who were segregationists in 1960 were not by 1970. And so what you saw was a kind of progress that some people wanted to hold back, as they always do with this kind of progress. And so the Democrats were perceived as the party, by the time you get to 1968, who were leading that kind of progress. And as you know, Chris, before that, If someone told you they were a Republican, you didn't know if that person was a liberal or a conservative. If someone said they were a Democrat, you didn't know if that person was a liberal or a segregationist. All of that started to clarify and get locked in cement in 1968, so that now, if you say you're a Democrat, everyone thinks they know everything that you think about everything.
How did we have such exciting prospects for 68 coming in with Gene McCarthy in late 67, then Bobby Kennedy joining the fight, and Johnson quitting? How did we end up with two dull candidates, unexciting candidates like Nixon and Hubert Humphrey? How did we end up sort of a downer at the end of the year?
Well, it's the assassination that put us on, the Bobby Kennedy's assassination that put us on that inevitable road to Hubert Humphrey and the Democrat side. But what that campaign began with, Chris, was bravery, was a senator standing up and saying, I'm going to run against the president of my own party. That was something that was unheard of, and it was done by this obscure senator at the time, Gene McCarthy. Everyone was surprised when he did it. As you know, Bobby Kennedy thought about running before Gene McCarthy announced, and Bobby decided against it, and then he was never comfortable with his decision. He kept going back and forth. Gene McCarthy had some success in New Hampshire. And Chris, I was in high school. I thought Gene McCarthy won New Hampshire, and I thought that for decades after the fact.
Yeah, that's the way it played.
Because that's the way it played. It turns out he came in a very strong second. As you know, Bobby Kennedy then jumps into the race. Lyndon Johnson says, I quit, because as you know, Chris, every single possible candidate in 1968, every one of them was worried about one candidate, and that one candidate was Bobby Kennedy. Nixon was afraid of him. LBJ was afraid of him. Gene McCarthy was afraid of him. Everyone was.
Let's talk about the results. I voted for Humphrey, but I thought I did so because of civil rights and because I thought Ed Muskie was one hell of a running mate. You probably did too. And I thought Nixon, the tricky Dickie, would get us out of the war. He'd just say, that's the Democrat war. I'm getting the hell out of that stupid war. And yet he gets in there, and thanks to Henry Kissinger, he prolongs it for an entire term. Half the many the Americans killed in that war are killed after Nixon comes to office. That was not what the voters voted for. They did not vote for Nixon to keep that war going 4 more years. They voted for him to say, I got a secret plan to get out of this thing.
Exactly. He had that Trump was saying last year, I'll beat ISIS. I can do this. The generals can't do it, but I can. I know how to do it. And he kept, of course, that plan a secret because he didn't have one. Nixon implied that he had a secret plan to end that war, but he got obsessed with the same thing that LBJ was obsessed with and eventually with.